Kenichi Shinoda, later known by his underworld name Shinobu Tsukasa, was born in 1942 in Oita Prefecture on the southern island of Kyushu, Japan. His early life unfolded during a time of chaos and poverty in the wake of World War II. Japan was a nation struggling to rebuild itself, cities were in ruins, food was scarce, and crime was rising. In this harsh post-war environment, thousands of young men were left directionless, and Shinoda was no exception. Raised in a modest household, Shinoda grew up witnessing the crumbling social order and the growing influence of organized crime in his community. The collapse of traditional authority created a vacuum that groups like the Yakuza were quick to fill. In many towns, they acted as both protectors and predators, enforcing their own code of honor while capitalizing on desperation and fear. These influences shaped Shinoda's understanding of power, loyalty, and survival from an early age. Unlike many of his future rivals who would come from broken families or orphanages, Shinoda's youth wasn't marked by abandonment, but by an internal rebellion against the rigidity of post-war Japanese society. He showed signs early on of a man unwilling to follow the conventional path. Rather than pursuing academics or a corporate career, he gravitated toward the streets, places where strength, silence, and calculated aggression meant more than a diploma. His formative years were deeply influenced by the old-school Yakuza legends, who were known not just for their brutality but for their strict moral codes, loyalty, obedience, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the family. These values resonated deeply with him, and by his late teens, he had already begun associating with local gang members. What started as minor involvement in petty crime soon evolved into a life fully immersed in the Syndicate world. Shinoda's entry into the Yakuza wasn't an accident, it was a calling. He admired the structure, the rituals, the hierarchy. It gave him identity and purpose. In a society that prized conformity, the Yakuza gave him power by embracing his defiance. This environment nurtured his transformation from a disaffected youth into a man whose name would one day strike fear across Japan. His rise wasn't driven by luck but by a calculated understanding of human behavior and an unshakable commitment to the code of the underworld. By the time he officially became a sworn member of a Yakuza affiliate in the 1960s, Kenichi Shinoda had already shed his past and was reborn under the Syndicate's oath of blood and silence. Kenichi Shinoda's rise through the Yakuza ranks was anything but ordinary. It was a carefully calculated journey through violence, discipline, and unwavering ambition. In the 1960s, Japan was experiencing rapid economic growth, often referred to as the Japanese post-war miracle. With construction booming and infrastructure projects unfolding across the country, it was the perfect environment for organized crime to flourish behind the scenes. For Shinoda, this was an opportunity, not just to make money, but to prove his dominance in a world where only the most ruthless could survive. Shinoda began his criminal career under the Takumi-gumi, a prominent affiliate of the larger Yamaguchi-gumi organization, which had its base in Nagoya. The Takumi-gumi was known for its aggressive expansion, and Shinoda quickly distinguished himself as a fearless and loyal enforcer. While others sought to maintain a low profile, Shinoda leaned into the Yakuza's violent image, often leading operations that involved extortion, gambling dens, illegal construction contracts, and territorial disputes. He wasn't just physically intimidating, he was strategic, often settling conflicts without bloodshed by studying his opponent's weaknesses and striking at just the right moment. What made Shinoda stand out even more was his strict adherence to Yakuza code, known as Ninkyo-do, the way of the chivalrous man. He practiced deep loyalty to his oyabun, boss, followed hierarchical discipline, and punished betrayal with merciless efficiency. In a criminal culture that revered respect and tradition, these traits weren't just respected, they were feared. He was known to be calm under pressure, a man who spoke little but commanded immense authority in every room he entered. It didn't take long for his name to echo in circles far beyond his immediate group. By the 1980s, Shinoda had become one of the most influential figures within the Takumi-gumi. His crew expanded rapidly, attracting young recruits who were drawn to his charisma and leadership style. Unlike other Yakuza leaders who operated from luxury offices and distanced themselves from street-level violence, Shinoda remained hands-on, attending ceremonies, overseeing deals, and even showing up at funerals and weddings of fellow members to reinforce a sense of unity and family. This blend of traditional loyalty and modern organization made him a powerful figure among both old-school bosses and younger gangsters. His relentless rise wasn't without bloodshed. The Yakuza world was notoriously unstable, with factions often turning on one another in deadly power struggles. But Shinoda knew how to navigate the chaos. He didn't just survive turf wars, he often came out stronger, using strategic alliances, intelligence gathering, and psychological tactics to outmaneuver rivals. Whether it was settling disputes between factions or orchestrating underground business deals, Shinoda developed a reputation as a master tactician. His growing influence eventually reached the top brass of the Yamaguchi-gumi. His ability to keep the Takumi-gumi profitable, disciplined, and feared made him a valuable asset to the broader organization. Over time, Shinoda was no longer just a respected subordinate. He became a candidate for leadership, a man seen as capable of guiding the Yamaguchi-gumi through the modern age of organized crime. In 2005, Kenichi Shinoda, known in the criminal world as Shinobu Tsukasa, achieved what few in the Yakuza ever dared to dream. He rose to become the sixth Kumicho, or supreme boss, of the Yamaguchi-gumi, the largest and most powerful Yakuza syndicate in Japan and one of the most influential organized crime groups in the world. This historic appointment marked a dramatic turning point, not only for the Yamaguchi-gumi but for the entire structure of Japanese organized crime. Shinoda's rise to the top wasn't just a matter of succession, it was a strategic power shift that shook the Yakuza establishment. For decades, the leadership of the Yamaguchi-gumi had been based in Kobe, where its roots had grown deep since its founding in 1915. The group had traditionally chosen its Kumicho from Kobe-based affiliates, ensuring that control remained close to home and steeped in old-guard conservatism. Shinoda, however, was a Nagoya-based outsider from the Takumi-gumi, a break from precedent that signaled a new era of expansion, ambition, and modernization. His selection as boss wasn't just surprising, it was controversial. Many older factions within the Syndicate resisted the idea of a non-Kobe leader, fearing that Shinoda would shift power away from the group's historical stronghold. But Shinoda's record spoke louder than any criticism. His leadership in Takumi-gumi had demonstrated his ability to grow revenue, manage rivalries, and maintain strict internal discipline. More importantly, he had shown that he could evolve with the times, understanding that the modern Yakuza couldn't survive on tradition alone, it needed to adapt like a multinational enterprise. Upon taking control, Shinoda immediately began reshaping the syndicate. One of his first symbolic acts was moving the headquarters of the Yamaguchi-gumi from Kobe to Nagoya, a stunning gesture that angered many within the inner circle but cemented his authority. He sent a clear message: the old ways of regional loyalty and historical hierarchy were over. From now on, power would be based on efficiency, expansion, and results. But Shinoda's elevation came at a cost. Shortly after becoming Kumicho, he was imprisoned on a prior charge involving illegal possession of weapons, a tactic frequently used by Japanese authorities to detain Yakuza leaders and disrupt their operations. In most criminal organizations, the imprisonment of a boss would create chaos, infighting, or a dangerous power vacuum. But Shinoda's grip on the Yamaguchi-gumi was unshakable. Even from behind bars, he remained in full control of the syndicate's operations, issuing commands through a trusted network of lieutenants, enforcing discipline, and continuing expansion. His brief physical absence did little to slow the syndicate's momentum. In fact, it only reinforced his image as a leader who could not be broken. During his incarceration, the Yamaguchi-gumi structure remained intact, their businesses continued to thrive, and their influence expanded even further. When he was finally released, Shinoda returned not as a weakened figure but as an even more respected icon, feared by rivals, admired by subordinates, and watched closely by law enforcement. His leadership also ushered in a more corporate vision of organized crime, where the lines between legal and illegal activities blurred. Front companies, real estate investments, stock market manipulation, and sophisticated money laundering schemes began to replace the crude extortion tactics of the past. Under Shinoda, the Yamaguchi-gumi transformed from a feared street gang into a shadow empire, deeply woven into the fabric of Japanese commerce and politics. When Kenichi Shinoda assumed leadership of the Yamaguchi-gumi, he inherited more than just Japan's largest criminal syndicate. He took control of an aging institution at a critical crossroads. The world was changing fast. Traditional Yakuza operations, like street-level extortion, illegal gambling, and smuggling, were increasingly under siege from law enforcement, public scrutiny, and a rapidly modernizing society. Shinoda recognized that if the Yamaguchi-gumi was to survive and thrive in this new era, it would have to evolve beyond brute force and embrace the tools of the modern business world. One of Shinoda's boldest moves as Kumicho was to rebrand the Yamaguchi-gumi as a disciplined, corporate-style organization. This wasn't just cosmetic. It was a strategic transformation in how the Yakuza operated, recruited, and exerted influence. Under his vision, the syndicate began to mirror a multinational corporation, complete with strict internal hierarchies, regional divisions, financial audits, and even training systems for junior members. Shinoda understood that longevity in organized crime wasn't just about violence. It was about structure, discipline, and adaptability. The shift began with language and presentation. Senior Yakuza members started referring to themselves using corporate terminology. They were managers, regional directors, and executives. Meetings were run like boardroom briefings, and operations were mapped out like business plans. Members were discouraged from drawing public attention or behaving like common thugs. Instead, they were encouraged to maintain appearances of respectability, wearing suits, avoiding street fights, and focusing on high-reward, low-risk crimes. Shinoda also placed significant emphasis on white-collar criminal activities. He steered the Yamaguchi-gumi deeper into real estate development, construction kickbacks, front companies, investment fraud, and corporate blackmail. In cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, Yakuza-linked firms bid on government projects, managed high-rise developments, and infiltrated labor unions. Through legitimate-seeming businesses, they funneled money into syndicate accounts and laundered illicit profits through banking networks both in Japan and abroad. It was an empire with legitimate-looking books, an invisible hand influencing entire industries without a trace of overt violence. Another crucial part of Shinoda's strategy was media manipulation and public image control. He knew the Japanese public's perception of the Yakuza was shifting. Where once they were seen as rough men with a code, protectors of tradition and community, they were now viewed as parasites. Shinoda attempted to restore a sense of honor and social role by implementing community services, such as disaster relief and charity donations, particularly during natural calamities like the 2011 Tohoku earthquake. These acts weren't just goodwill gestures, they were carefully calculated moves to soften the Yakuza's image and maintain local influence. Internally, Shinoda introduced stricter codes of behavior and accountability. Members were expected to adhere to business ethics, even within the criminal framework. Wasteful violence, disorganized operations, or unnecessary police attention were considered unprofessional and punishable. He demanded loyalty, performance, and results, much like a modern CEO running a high-stakes enterprise. Promotions were based on strategic success, not just muscle. This professionalism attracted a new type of recruit, more educated, more discreet, and better equipped to navigate both legal and illegal markets. Shinoda also encouraged international learning, sending trusted lieutenants to observe criminal models abroad, from the American Mafia to Chinese triads. He wasn't interested in outdated traditions alone, he wanted innovation. The Yamaguchi-gumi under his leadership became leaner, smarter, and more elusive. He turned the Syndicate into an institution that didn't just rule from the shadows, it operated as a parallel economy, embedded in the financial lifeblood of Japan itself. One of Kenichi Shinoda's most ambitious and transformative strategies as the leader of the Yamaguchi-gumi was his push for international expansion. While the Yakuza had long maintained influence within Japan's borders, Shinoda recognized early on that the future of organized crime, like legitimate business, was global. He understood that true power in the 21st century came not only from local dominance but from a transnational presence, with tentacles stretching into foreign markets, financial hubs, and black market networks across the globe. Under Shinoda's leadership, the Yamaguchi-gumi began to expand its footprint beyond Japan with unprecedented precision. This was not a wild or desperate reach outward, but a calculated infiltration into regions where law enforcement was weaker, corruption was rampant, or opportunities for profit were exploding. Southeast Asia became a key focus, particularly countries like Thailand, the Philippines, Cambodia, and Vietnam, nations where drug trafficking routes, human smuggling operations, and underground casinos offered lucrative new streams of revenue. Yakuza members, posing as businessmen or investors, established connections with local crime syndicates and began facilitating cross-border deals in methamphetamine distribution, arms smuggling, and counterfeit goods. At the same time, Shinoda targeted the United States and Canada, particularly cities with large Japanese or Asian immigrant populations such as Los Angeles, Honolulu, Vancouver, and San Francisco. There, the Yamaguchi-gumi began forming loose alliances with other Asian criminal organizations, Korean mobs, Chinese triads, and Vietnamese gangs, to share smuggling routes and launder money through overseas casinos and real estate holdings. In some cases, they acted behind the scenes, using proxy figures or front companies to invest in legitimate businesses like sushi chains, nightclubs, car dealerships, or art galleries, places that provided both cover and capital. This global strategy wasn't just about crime, it was about infrastructure. Shinoda believed in building a network that mirrored multinational corporations, layered, compartmentalized, and agile. He recruited bilingual operatives, tech-savvy enforcers, and financial experts who could move money across borders without detection. Offshore banking, cryptocurrency laundering, shell companies in the Cayman Islands or Hong Kong, these were no longer tools of the elite alone. They became standard operating procedures for the Yamaguchi-gumi under Shinoda's reign. Perhaps most chilling was the Yamaguchi-gumi's entry into cybercrime, another frontier Shinoda prioritized as part of global expansion. From Southeast Asia, operations were launched that included phishing scams, identity theft, ransomware attacks, and even online manipulation of financial markets. These activities allowed the Syndicate to strike from afar, leaving few digital traces but reaping massive financial rewards. By outsourcing operations and using decentralized cells in other countries, Shinoda created a structure that was resilient, hard to trace, and difficult to dismantle. Shinoda's international push also came with a change in mindset. While older Yakuza generations viewed their territory as confined to the Japanese archipelago, Shinoda envisioned a new empire without borders. He emphasized the importance of learning foreign languages, understanding international laws, and keeping a close eye on geopolitical shifts. Members were instructed to behave like corporate diplomats abroad, keeping a low profile while embedding themselves in the economic arteries of foreign cities. Yet despite this outward-looking approach, the Yamaguchi-gumi never lost its core identity. Every expansion, every overseas deal, every shipment, every account, still funneled power and resources back to the Syndicate's core leadership in Japan. The global strategy was not about abandoning the homeland, but strengthening it by tapping into the world's underground economies. For Shinoda, global influence wasn't a side mission, it was a survival strategy, and one that reshaped the Yakuza into a 21st-century criminal superpower. Kenichi Shinoda's criminal career was marked not only by power and expansion but also by lengthy and strategic prison terms, periods behind bars that would have shattered the authority of most crime bosses. But Shinoda wasn't like most men. In his world, prison was not a sign of weakness. It was a rite of passage, a crucible of respect, and often, a strategic pause in a long game of power. His prison sentences became defining chapters of his legacy. Moments that tested his command, refined his strategy, and ultimately proved his unshakable grip on the Yamaguchi-gumi. One of the most significant prison stints began in the 1990s, when Shinoda was convicted for murder, a charge that would sentence him to 13 years in a Japanese prison. The crime itself stemmed from an internal gang feud that escalated into lethal violence. While the details remain clouded in secrecy, insiders say that Shinoda personally ordered, and possibly even committed, the killing. In the eyes of his enemies, this should have been the end, a blow to his credibility, a fracture in his influence. But for Shinoda, it was an opportunity to consolidate his myth. Inside prison, he was treated with reverence by fellow inmates and even by certain guards who understood the weight of his name. Prison life in Japan is notoriously strict, rigid schedules, silence during meals, no tolerance for insubordination. Yet Shinoda thrived within the order. He reportedly maintained a stoic discipline, never requesting special treatment, never revealing weakness. He used his time to study legal loopholes, refine his understanding of syndicate management, and send coded messages to his subordinates through lawyers, relatives, and visiting lieutenants. Even locked away, he governed like a general in exile, and the organization followed his will without question. While Shinoda was serving time, the Yamaguchi-gumi didn't splinter or slow down. It expanded, diversified, and even modernized. His top lieutenants followed a pre-established chain of command, and internal rules prevented any power grabs in his absence. This wasn't accidental. It was the result of a system Shinoda had engineered meticulously before his incarceration. It demonstrated his foresight and ability to think not in years, but in decades. The prison walls did not contain his influence, they only added to his mystique. In 2005, upon his release, Shinoda emerged from prison into a very different Japan. Law enforcement had tightened its grip on the Yakuza, anti-organized crime laws had been strengthened, and public sentiment had grown increasingly hostile. But instead of retreating, Shinoda stepped back into the spotlight with an even greater sense of purpose. Mere months after his release, he was elected as the 6th Kumicho of the Yamaguchi-gumi, a stunning return that sent shockwaves through the underworld and stunned government officials. To the public, it was unimaginable. How could a man fresh from a murder sentence rise to head the most feared criminal empire in the country? But to his followers, it was destiny fulfilled. However, the Japanese justice system wasn't finished with him. In 2005, the same year he took the reins of the Yamaguchi-gumi, Shinoda was arrested again, this time on charges of illegal firearm possession, an offense stemming from a handgun found in his bodyguard's vehicle. Despite the claim that the weapon was not his, Shinoda was held accountable under Japan's strict gun control laws. This conviction led to another 6-year prison sentence, further testing his ability to lead from behind bars. Yet once again, his command never faltered. From within prison walls, Shinoda maintained communication with his senior officers, overseeing syndicate operations through a secure chain of messengers. The organization continued to run efficiently, carrying out high-level financial schemes, managing territorial disputes, and navigating the growing pressure from law enforcement. What makes Shinoda's prison history remarkable is not just the sentences themselves, but how he used them. Where most leaders would fade into irrelevance or be overthrown, Shinoda turned incarceration into a tool of leadership, a symbol of his sacrifice, and a testament to his ability to endure. His time in prison didn't just preserve his power, it deepened it. To his followers, he was no longer just a boss. He was a living legend, a man who had survived the system and returned, each time, more powerful than before. In 2015, a seismic event shook the foundations of the Japanese underworld. The Yamaguchi-gumi, Japan's most powerful and feared Yakuza syndicate, fractured from within. The organization, which had thrived for over a century under a code of unity and obedience, suddenly split into warring factions, triggering one of the most dramatic internal power struggles in modern Yakuza history. At the center of this rift was none other than Kenichi Shinoda, the sixth Kumicho, whose bold leadership style, reforms, and centralization of power had sparked deep resentment among traditionalist factions. The seeds of the split were sown years earlier, as Shinoda began aggressively reorganizing the Yamaguchi-gumi's internal structure. His vision for the group as a streamlined, business-oriented criminal empire clashed with the old-school mentality of regional bosses who had grown accustomed to autonomy and influence in their respective territories. Shinoda had moved the organization's operational focus away from Kobe, its historical stronghold, and into Nagoya, signaling a shift in political gravity. This upset many within the syndicate, particularly the powerful Kobe-based factions, who viewed the change not just as a strategic move but as a betrayal of tradition. Shinoda's reorganization tightened the central leadership's control. Profits were redirected, operations were restructured, and regional bosses were increasingly expected to follow directives from the top with little room for negotiation. While some applauded the modernization and financial growth under Shinoda, others saw it as an erosion of the Yakuza's original values: loyalty, honor, and mutual respect among equals. Rumblings of dissatisfaction grew louder, and behind closed doors, conversations about rebellion began to take shape. By August 2015, the tension reached a breaking point. 13 powerful affiliate groups, mostly Kobe-based, broke away from the Yamaguchi-gumi and announced the formation of a new rival organization, the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi. The split was unprecedented, not only in its scale but in its audacity. This wasn't a minor defection or a quiet rebranding, it was a direct challenge to Shinoda's authority, a declaration of civil war within Japan's largest criminal network. The news sent shockwaves across Japan. Law enforcement agencies, already burdened with the growing sophistication of Yakuza operations, now faced the prospect of violent turf wars erupting between two deeply entrenched factions. The media buzzed with fears of assassinations, bombings, and street shootouts. Though initial violence was limited, the split destabilized territories that had long been held in balance by Yamaguchi-gumi dominance. Police units in Tokyo, Osaka, Fukuoka, and Nagoya braced for retaliation, while Shinoda's loyalists moved quickly to reassert control and protect key revenue streams. What made the split even more complex was its ideological nature. The Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi positioned itself as the defender of traditional Yakuza values, a group formed not just in opposition to Shinoda's leadership, but in rejection of the corporate, modernized structure he had built. They claimed he had strayed too far from the Yakuza's roots, treating the syndicate like a business empire and abandoning the communal codes that once bound members together like family. In response, Shinoda doubled down. His faction labeled the breakaway group as traitors, invoking the strict Yakuza code that demands absolute loyalty to the Kumicho. Internal purges took place. Members suspected of sympathizing with the Kobe group were demoted or expelled. The syndicate implemented more intense loyalty screenings, and surveillance of mid-level operatives increased. Shinoda's inner circle became more guarded, more exclusive, and more militant in its defense of his vision. The financial impact of the split was equally significant. Major income streams, from gambling and construction rackets to stock fraud and overseas operations, had to be resecured or renegotiated. In some regions, the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi took control of local fronts, demanding tribute from businesses that had once paid the main syndicate. These disruptions created instability not only within criminal circles but also within Japan's legal economy, where many businesses operated in quiet coordination with Yakuza-backed firms. Law enforcement saw the split as both a crisis and an opportunity. On one hand, the fragmentation of the Yamaguchi-gumi made the underworld more volatile and dangerous. On the other hand, it exposed internal weaknesses, allowed infiltration, and provided leverage in cutting deals with defectors. The police began publishing more detailed lists of known Yakuza members, encouraging the public and private sector to cut ties with all syndicate-related entities. Banks, construction firms, and property managers were warned to sever relationships or face prosecution. Yet despite the fallout, Shinoda never publicly addressed the split. He remained silent, refusing interviews, and rarely appearing in public, his aura of mystery only deepening. To his loyal followers, this silence was not weakness, it was strategy. His message was clear: real power does not respond to rebellion with panic, but with precision. Kenichi Shinoda's legacy extends far beyond his position as the sixth Kumicho of the Yamaguchi-gumi. It is etched deep into the very fabric of modern Japanese organized crime, a complex legacy marked by transformation, resilience, and controversy. Over the decades, Shinoda became more than a gangster. He became a symbol of old-world discipline colliding with modern strategy, of an underworld figure who embraced the suit-and-tie professionalism of the boardroom without ever letting go of the code of the blade. Even as he grew older and Japan's crackdown on the Yakuza intensified, Shinoda's influence did not wane, it evolved. He cultivated an image of quiet dominance, rarely appearing in public, almost never speaking to the media, and issuing commands through an intricate, carefully managed internal hierarchy. This mystique only magnified his power. His name carried weight not just in Japan, but internationally. In criminal circles from Bangkok to Los Angeles, the mention of Shinobu Tsukasa was met with both fear and respect. While the Japanese government moved to weaken the Yakuza through the anti-Boryokuden laws, freezing assets and discouraging any form of association with gang members, Shinoda's operations adapted. He encouraged his lieutenants to work through front companies, often in real estate, finance, and construction, blending illicit earnings into legitimate business activity. Through this, the Yamaguchi-gumi was able to maintain a financial footprint even in a time when open Yakuza affiliation became increasingly dangerous. The gray zone, where criminal networks operate just within the boundaries of the law, was where Shinoda truly thrived. Internally, his leadership redefined the expectations of a Yakuza boss. He emphasized not just loyalty and strength, but discipline, education, and operational efficiency. Under his influence, younger members were taught how to read balance sheets, understand contract law, and navigate digital currencies, skills unheard of in the traditional Yakuza training of previous generations. Shinoda's syndicate didn't just enforce territory through violence, it took over through economic strategy. One of the most significant testaments to his legacy is the enduring structure of the Yamaguchi-gumi, even after internal splits and nationwide crackdowns. Despite the formation of rival factions like the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi and continued pressure from law enforcement, Shinoda's core syndicate retained its size, reach, and internal loyalty. His organizational model proved durable, with clear chains of command, contingency planning, and decentralized cells that allowed the group to survive legal scrutiny without collapsing. Culturally, Shinoda has also become an almost mythical figure in Japanese media and popular imagination. Though the Yakuza are widely condemned in Japanese society, the public remains fascinated by their rituals, secrecy, and paradoxical sense of honor. Shinoda, in particular, is seen as the embodiment of the Yakuza's internal contradictions, a man capable of cold, calculated violence, yet guided by strict codes, a criminal leader with the poise of a corporate executive, a relic of Japan's past who understood the pulse of its future. Even retired or inactive members of the Yamaguchi-gumi still speak of Shinoda with reverence, referring to him as the man who kept the family alive during one of the most hostile eras for organized crime in Japanese history. His decisions, some praised, some feared, reshaped how the Yakuza interacts with the outside world. He moved the syndicate from alleys and gambling dens to investment portfolios and cross-border operations. While the gang no longer boasts the unchecked power it once had in the mid-20th century, Much of its remaining strength is owed to the infrastructure and philosophy laid down under Shinoda's reign. From Tokyo's financial corridors to Osaka's back alleys, from the courtroom to the corporate boardroom, Kenichi Shinoda's legacy continues to cast a long shadow over Japan's criminal world. His image, calm, silent, calculating, is not just a reflection of who he was, but a warning of what he built, a machine that, even under siege, continues to operate with stunning efficiency.